Another important factor is protective or restraining orders. Violating such an order, even unintentionally, can have serious consequences. Something as simple as being in the wrong place at the wrong time or misunderstanding the terms of a restriction can be interpreted as a violation. And once a violation is recorded, it may be used as evidence of non-compliance with legal obligations. In immigration proceedings, patterns of behavior matter. A single violation may not always lead to immediate removal, but it can weaken your position, especially if combined with other issues. The key takeaway here is that family-related legal situations should never be treated casually when immigration status is involved. Even if the incident seems minor, even if the outcome in criminal court appears favorable, the immigration implications may be very different. This is why coordination between legal professionals is essential in such cases. Decisions made under emotional stress, without understanding long-term consequences, can unintentionally create risks that are difficult to reverse later. Now let's shift to a category of risk that often goes unnoticed for years but can surface at the most unexpected time. Administrative violations and long-term compliance issues, including immigration fraud and failure to meet basic reporting requirements. Unlike criminal or domestic cases, these issues don't always involve dramatic events or immediate legal trouble. Instead, they build quietly in the background, often hidden in paperwork, forms, or past applications. And because they seem minor or administrative in nature, many people underestimate their importance until they are reviewed under scrutiny. One of the most serious concerns in this category is misrepresentation or fraud in immigration applications. This can include providing false information on forms, omitting important details, using documents that are not authentic, or entering into arrangements that are later interpreted as deceptive. Even statements made during interviews with immigration officials can come under review years later. What makes this particularly dangerous is that there is often no expiration on these issues. In other words, immigration authorities can revisit past applications at any time if new information comes to light. Imagine someone who obtained legal status many years ago. Over time, they built a life in the United States, career, family, home, and community ties. From their perspective, everything is stable. But if an earlier application is later found to contain inconsistencies or misrepresentations, that original status can be questioned. In such cases, authorities may initiate proceedings to review whether the status was properly granted in the first place. And if it is determined that fraud or misrepresentation occurred, the consequences can include revocation of status and potential removal from the country. Another often overlooked requirement is the obligation to keep immigration authorities informed of your current address. This may sound simple, but failure to comply can create complications. Permanent residents are required to report address changes within a specific time frame. While missing this step may not immediately trigger removal proceedings on its own, it can become a factor in a broader case. For example, if someone is already under review or involved in proceedings, failure to maintain updated records can be viewed as non-compliance with legal obligations. It may also result in missed notices, court dates, or important communications, which can lead to additional legal complications. What ties all of these issues together is documentation and consistency. Immigration systems rely heavily on records, forms, and declarations. Any inconsistency between what was previously reported and what is later discovered can raise questions. Even small discrepancies, dates, employment history, travel records, can become significant when examined in detail. This is why maintaining accurate records and ensuring consistency across all filings is critical. Ultimately, the danger in this category is not just the violation itself, but the accumulation of small oversights over time. A single error might not be enough to trigger major consequences, but multiple inconsistencies, omissions, or inaccuracies can form a pattern that immigration authorities may interpret as a lack of credibility or compliance. And once credibility is questioned, every aspect of a case becomes harder to defend. The best way to protect yourself here is through awareness, organization, and honesty. Keeping thorough records, updating information promptly, and ensuring that all submissions are accurate and consistent can significantly reduce risk. Because unlike sudden legal incidents, these administrative issues often give no warning signs. They surface only when your history is reviewed. And at that point, the strength of your documentation and the accuracy of your past filings can make all the difference in the outcome. Now we arrive at the final layer of risk, something that often appears harmless on the surface, but can quietly undermine your entire immigration case: ongoing compliance obligations and behavioral patterns that immigration authorities interpret over time. This isn't about a single mistake or one isolated incident. This is about how your actions, decisions, and consistency collectively form a record that either supports your case or weakens it. Many people believe that once they obtain a green card or long-term legal status, their responsibility becomes minimal. In reality, that status comes with continuous obligations that must be maintained without interruption. One of the most important aspects of maintaining legal status is understanding that immigration authorities are not only evaluating what you did at a specific moment, they are evaluating your overall pattern of conduct. This includes how consistently you follow reporting requirements, whether your documentation aligns across different applications, how you respond to requests from authorities, and whether your behavior reflects reliability and compliance over time. Even small lapses, when viewed collectively, can create concerns during reviews or interviews. For example, inconsistencies between forms submitted years apart, unexplained gaps in employment history, or discrepancies in travel records can raise questions that require explanation. Individually, these issues may seem minor, but together they can impact how your credibility is assessed. Another critical element is timing. Immigration processes often involve long gaps between events, applications submitted years apart, renewals that occur periodically, or interviews that revisit past history. Because of this, information you provided in the past is often reevaluated in light of new applications or updated data. If something in your current submission doesn't align with previous records, it can trigger deeper review. This is why consistency across all documentation is essential. Even unintentional errors, if repeated or left uncorrected, can appear as patterns of inconsistency. Travel is another area where compliance matters significantly. Leaving and re-entering the United States requires proper documentation and adherence to rules associated with your status. Extended absences, frequent international travel, or unclear travel history can sometimes lead to additional scrutiny. Immigration authorities may examine whether your primary residence remains in the United States and whether your travel patterns align with the requirements of your legal status. Maintaining clear records of travel dates, purposes, and durations can help avoid complications during these evaluations. Equally important is maintaining updated personal records with immigration authorities. As discussed earlier, even something as simple as failing to update your address can create issues if it leads to missed notices or missed deadlines. But beyond that, keeping your records current ensures that communication from immigration authorities reaches you without delay. Missing a critical notice due to outdated information can result in missed court appearances or unanswered requests, which may have serious consequences in ongoing cases. Ultimately, what defines long-term success in maintaining legal status is not perfection, but consistency, awareness, and responsibility. Immigration systems are designed to evaluate not just isolated actions, but overall behavior patterns. By staying organized, keeping your records accurate, fulfilling your reporting obligations, and ensuring consistency across all interactions, you significantly reduce the risk of complications. While no system can guarantee absolute protection, maintaining a disciplined and informed approach gives you the strongest possible position to preserve your status and continue building your life in the United States without unnecessary disruption. What if everything you believe about your legal safety in the United States is only half true? What if the system you trusted, the rules you followed, and the life you carefully built could still collapse? Not because you broke the law in a major way, but because of something small, something overlooked, something you didn't even realize mattered? This isn't speculation. This is happening right now to thousands of people who once felt exactly as secure as you do today. People who worked hard, paid taxes, raised families, and stayed out of trouble, yet still found themselves facing the unthinkable, losing their legal status, and being forced to leave everything behind. The truth is, the immigration system doesn't operate on assumptions, intentions, or fairness in the way most people expect. It operates on strict rules, technical definitions, and unforgiving interpretations that can turn even a minor mistake into a life-altering crisis. And today, you're about to uncover exactly how fragile that security can be. Right now, across the country, individuals with green cards, work visas, and long-term legal status are being pulled into immigration proceedings not because they committed serious crimes, but because of decisions they made years ago, decisions that seemed harmless at the time. A quick plea deal, a misunderstanding during paperwork, a moment of frustration that escalated too far. These aren't extreme situations, these are everyday scenarios. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone who doesn't fully understand how the system actually works behind the scenes. The gap between what you think is safe and what the law considers safe is wider than most people realize. Let's break that illusion right now. Many people believe that as long as they avoid serious crimes, they're protected. That if they've never been convicted of a felony, they have nothing to worry about. But immigration law doesn't always follow the same definitions used in criminal court. Something labeled as a misdemeanor at the state level can still be treated as a severe offense under federal immigration rules. That means a case you thought was resolved, something you paid a fine for and moved on from, can come back years later and be reinterpreted in a completely different way. And when that happens, the consequences aren't just fines or warnings. They can include detention, court hearings, and even removal from the country. Now imagine the emotional weight of that moment. You've built a life here. Maybe you've spent 10, 15, even 20 years in the United States. Your children go to school here. Your job, your home, your daily routine, everything is rooted in this country. Then suddenly, without warning, you receive a notice. You're being called into immigration court. Something from your past has resurfaced. Something you thought was finished. And now you're being told it could cost you everything. That's not just a legal problem. That's a personal earthquake. And for many people, it comes completely out of nowhere. What makes this even more unsettling is how quickly things can escalate once the process begins. The system today moves faster than ever. Cases that used to take years are now being processed in a fraction of that time. That means less room for error, less time to prepare, and fewer opportunities to fix mistakes. Once you're inside the system, you're no longer in control of the timeline. Decisions happen quickly, and the margin for defending yourself becomes smaller with each passing day. This is why understanding the risks before you ever face a problem is absolutely critical. But here's the part most people never hear about. It's not just major legal issues that put you at risk. It's patterns, it's technicalities, it's small actions that, when combined, create a narrative about your behavior and compliance. The system doesn't just look at one moment, it looks at the bigger picture. Have you followed every requirement? Have you reported every change? Have you been completely transparent in every interaction? Even something as simple as missing a required update or misunderstanding a rule can be used to question your credibility. And once your credibility is questioned, everything else becomes harder to defend. This is where awareness becomes your strongest defense. Because the reality is, most of these risks are preventable, but only if you know they exist. The problem isn't that people are intentionally breaking the rules. The problem is that they don't fully understand how strict and technical those rules really are. They rely on assumptions. They take advice from the wrong sources. They trust that common sense will protect them. But immigration law doesn't operate on common sense. It operates on precision. And that brings us to a critical turning point in this conversation. Because what you're about to learn next isn't just information, it's protection. It's the difference between reacting to a crisis and avoiding it entirely. The mistakes we're going to break down aren't rare. They're not unusual. In fact, they're incredibly common. And that's exactly why they're so dangerous. Because when something feels normal, you don't question it. You don't prepare for it. You don't see it coming. So, as we move forward, I want you to shift your mindset. Don't think of this as just another piece of information. Think of it as a warning system, a way to identify risks before they become consequences. Because once certain lines are crossed in the immigration system, there's often no easy way back. And by the time most people realize that, it's already too late. This is where everything changes. In the next part, we're going to expose the first major mistake that has destroyed the legal status of countless individuals, often without them realizing the danger until it was too late. And once you understand how it works, you'll never look at minor legal issues the same way again. Now let's step into the most misunderstood and most dangerous area of immigration risk: criminal charges that don't look serious but carry devastating consequences. This is where the illusion of safety completely falls apart. Because in the world of immigration law, it's not about what you think the crime was. It's about how the system classifies it behind the scenes. And that difference alone has destroyed lives. Right now, there are people sitting in immigration detention centers who never served a single day in criminal jail. People who walked out of court thinking they were free, only to be pulled back in months or even years later by immigration authorities who saw their case very differently. Here's the truth that most people never hear. Immigration law operates on a completely separate framework from criminal law. That means a deal that seems harmless in a local courtroom can be catastrophic in federal immigration proceedings. Prosecutors are focused on closing cases quickly. They offer plea deals that reduce charges, eliminate jail time, and make everything seem manageable. And for a U.S. citizen, that might actually be a good outcome. But for a non-citizen, that same deal can be a trap. Because the moment you accept certain charges, even minor ones, you may be stepping into a category that immigration law treats as a deportable offense. One of the most dangerous examples of this is something called an aggravated felony. And despite how it sounds, this term is incredibly misleading. It doesn't necessarily mean the crime was aggravated. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a felony under state law. In fact, many people who are charged with misdemeanors end up falling into this category without ever realizing it. Theft, for example, even something as small as shoplifting, can trigger serious immigration consequences depending on how the case is structured. Fraud-related offenses, even involving small amounts, can be interpreted in ways that place you at risk. Certain types of assault, even without serious injury, can cross that line. And once that classification is applied, the consequences become brutally unforgiving. Imagine this scenario. You're involved in a minor incident, maybe a misunderstanding at a store, maybe an argument that gets out of hand. You're charged, but your lawyer negotiates a deal. No jail time, just a fine, maybe some community service. You accept it because it seems like the fastest way to move on. And for a while, everything feels normal again. Life goes on. Years pass. Then one day, you apply for citizenship, or you travel outside the U.S. and try to return. Suddenly, you're stopped, questioned, detained. That old case? It's being reviewed under immigration law. And now it's being treated as something far more serious than you ever imagined. At that moment, your past isn't behind you anymore. It's the center of your future. But if that wasn't alarming enough, Drug-related issues take this risk to an entirely different level. Because when it comes to controlled substances, immigration law shows almost zero flexibility. It doesn't matter how small the amount was. It doesn't matter if it was your first offense. It doesn't matter if the case was dismissed or reduced. In many situations, even an admission, something you said during questioning or in court, can be enough to trigger immigration consequences. Let that sink in. You don't always need a conviction to be at risk. Sometimes what you say is enough. People often assume that minor drug possession isn't a big deal, especially in states where certain substances have been decriminalized or legalized. But here's the disconnect. Federal immigration law does not always follow state-level changes. Something that might be legal or lightly penalized locally can still be treated as a serious violation under federal rules. And this creates a dangerous false sense of security. Individuals think they're safe because they're following state laws, without realizing that immigration authorities are operating under a completely different standard. There is one narrow exception that people often point to: small amounts of marijuana. But even this exception is extremely limited and filled with conditions. It applies only in very specific circumstances, and even then, it doesn't guarantee protection. One misstep, one additional factor, can eliminate that exception entirely. And relying on it without proper legal guidance is a risk in itself. Now consider how easily these situations can happen. You borrow someone's prescription medication without thinking. You're in a car where someone else has drugs and suddenly you're implicated. You make a statement trying to cooperate, not realizing how it could be interpreted later. These aren't criminal masterminds. These are everyday people making everyday decisions. But in the immigration system, those decisions can carry consequences that last a lifetime. And here's where the real danger lies: timing, because these issues don't always surface immediately. They sit quietly in your record, waiting, and when you least expect it, during a routine application, a background check, or even a re-entry into the country, they come back into focus. And by then, your ability to fix the situation is limited. The system isn't designed to give second chances easily. It's designed to enforce rules strictly. This is why one of the most important decisions you can ever make is who you consult when you face legal trouble. Having just a criminal defense attorney is not enough. You need someone who understands immigration consequences at a deep level, because the strategy that helps you in criminal court might hurt you in immigration court. And without that coordination, you could be solving one problem while unknowingly creating a much bigger one. So as you absorb this, ask yourself, if something happened tomorrow, an unexpected situation, a misunderstanding, a charge, would you know how to protect your status? Would you know what to say, what not to say, what to accept, and what to fight? Because in these moments, hesitation and confusion can cost you everything, and we're not done yet. Because what you're about to hear next goes even deeper into areas people never suspect: family conflicts, personal disputes, and administrative mistakes that can quietly build into a serious immigration threat. These are situations that don't feel like legal risks at all, until suddenly they are. Now let's move into an area that many people underestimate but which carries extremely serious consequences: family-related disputes, domestic incidents, and protective order violations. At first glance, these situations may seem personal, emotional, and entirely separate from immigration law. But in reality, they often become one of the fastest paths into immigration trouble, sometimes even more quickly than criminal convictions. The reason is simple: immigration authorities treat certain types of behavior within households as indicators of public safety risk, and once a case falls into that category, the consequences escalate rapidly. What makes this especially complex is how broadly family and household are defined. It's not limited to a spouse alone. It can include ex-spouses, partners you live with, children, stepchildren, parents, or even individuals with whom you share a residence. In many cases, what begins as a verbal disagreement can escalate into a situation where law enforcement is called. Once that happens, even if no serious injury occurs, The mere involvement of authorities can trigger a chain reaction that leads to charges being filed, and those charges, depending on how they are classified, can later be interpreted under immigration law as domestic violence-related offenses. Here's where things become particularly risky. In criminal court, many of these cases are resolved as misdemeanors, often with outcomes like counseling programs, probation, or minimal penalties. From a local legal perspective, the case may appear minor and resolved, but immigration law does not always view these outcomes the same way. A conviction tied to domestic violence, even if it seems minor in criminal terms, can be treated as a deportable offense. And unlike some other areas of law, judges in immigration court often have very limited discretion when domestic violence is involved. Consider a situation where emotions run high during a personal conflict. Words are exchanged, one person calls the police, an arrest is made as a precaution. Later, a plea deal is offered, something straightforward, something that avoids jail time and seems like the quickest way to move forward. Many individuals accept this without realizing that the legal classification attached to that plea could later be interpreted in a way that affects their immigration status. Months or even years later, during a green card renewal, citizenship application, or routine review, that same incident can resurface and become a central issue in their case.